Good day. I am quite late today getting to my devotional. Just my calendar had other things that had to go in certain spots, and so I didn't get out at 1 o'clock as I have in other days. But that's okay. That's the way it's going to be sometimes. As a pastor, you have a very different schedule every week, but that's okay. Here we are now. Wherever you are today, hope you're having a great day. Once again, here in Nova Scotia, it's bright and sunny and hot again, and we seem to be having a lot of that lately. But let's take a look at our text for today. We're working our way through Proverbs, and we're on the 19th verse of chapter 1. And so I'm just going to read it, and we'll get right into it and see what we can glean from the biblical wisdom today. Proverbs 1:19 says, "So are the ways of everyone who gains by violence. It takes away the life of its possessors." So this is coming at the end of a few statements about the danger of going down a path of evil, and in particular, violence. Now, we've been talking and applying it to the general path of evil in life, but in particular, violence, the idea. And so it says at the end, as it concludes those remarks, it says, and I'll read it again, "So are the ways of everyone who gains by violence. It takes away the life of its possessor." And that's been kind of the point, is that we can be tempted to think that by aggressive, violent behavior, I can get what I want. But in the end, it takes away your life. And so that's the thing. That's the theme that's been going kind of through these verses. But I wanted to today just sort of focus a little bit on the actual idea of violence. In particular, violence itself tends to be a go-to way of life for those that choose an immoral path. It often ends, I would say almost usually ends up leading to a more and more violent state. If you think about it, with many of the vices that the Bible warns us about, for instance, anger, obviously, anger very easily tends to lead to violence. And you think, well, what anger is? Well, anger is a sense of justice, right? We sense something right or wrong has happened, and so we get angry. But often anger not managed in a godly way, and we choose to go down a not so godly way, an immoral way with our anger, it will naturally lead to violence. The more the anger is allowed to grow in you, it will naturally lead to violence. Same as with hate. If we decide to embrace choices of hate, then that's going to increasingly lead us down a road to a place where eventually we're going to much more likely, very likely, will turn eventually to some sort of violence in our hatefulness, right? We'll become increasingly hateful. Jesus actually said we go to the point of murder in our hearts. Well, it doesn't take much for what's in your heart to come out through your body. Envy is the same thing. The more we envy, we allow envy or coveting to grow in our heart, and the more that happens as we walk down the path of covetousness or envy, jealousy, well, it tends to lead to more and more violent way of life. And same with greed. If we're greedy and we want for ourselves, and the more things get in the way of us satisfying our greed, the more we will tend to move toward a violent way of life. Violence actually seems to be a very common outcome of immoral choices. Now, it's not absolute in the short term, but it tends to lead there. And the more you go down that path, the more likely you'll end up at a place where violence becomes your go-to. And so, the Proverbs warn us, like, if you choose that path and you go down that road, violence is in your future, and it takes away your life. The violence itself takes away your life. The way that leads to violence, it takes away your life. So our questions today, question number one, what is violence? It's probably important to talk about that a little bit. What do we mean when we talk about violence? Well, violence basically is any kind of physical aggression that attempts to harm, hurt, kill. It's meant to hurt in some way, to destroy and damage. And so when we're talking about violence, we're talking about that. Now, the term today is often applied to other things as well. We apply it to non-physical things sometimes. And I don't know if that's good or bad to do. I'll suggest it's probably not great to do it, but there's an aspect of saying you can do violence to something, by not treating it well verbally or something. So, okay, maybe. But in general, and I would say what Proverbs is talking about, is that place where we get to a place of actual physical violence and physical aggression. We attempt to harm or to even kill in some cases, and that's violence. Question 2 is, how does it take away the life of the possessor, the one who possesses that path of life that leads to violence? How does that take away your life? Well, there's an interesting little fact, but violence actually begets violence. The more we choose to be violent people, the more we will find violence coming from us and returning to us. And it's the same with the things that lead to violence. Like, the more angry we are, then you're going to find the more anger comes and the more anger returns. And the more hateful you are, well, the more hate will come and the more hate will return. And all of those things I listed, it tends to be this kind of a thing that the more of it you have, the more of it you have. And the more of it you have, the more of it you get in return. And so it ends up taking your life, because violence, when full blown, is murderous. It destroys life. And so it kind of takes your life in that way. Could literally take your life, or at least it takes away the worth of life itself. And so you may still be breathing, but you're not really living, because your life is so full of anxiety and fear and harm from the violent life that you've chosen. It's a pretty bad thing. If you consider in history the French Revolution, for instance, we could pick so many things from history, but think about the French Revolution. They had what they called the Night of Terror, or whatever. It was the Days of Terror, that period when everybody was being taken to the guillotine and killed, and it was horrible. And it's rather an interesting commentary when you realize that during that time of intense violence in that country, so many of the revolutionaries themselves ended up dying in the guillotine. Like, it took the life not only of their victims but of themselves, and a lot of them, like amazing amount of them. And it's kind of like that, right? Like when we the more we give way to that, the more it's going to take your life from you, and in particular violence. It's poetic justice in a sense, like as Jesus said, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. But it's really kind of sad when you think about it, that the person can end up in that place. Sadly, a lot of people in our world today do live in environments where violence has become a norm. And whether you think about street-involved people, or you think about people in dysfunctional marriages that become abusive, or things like this, and it's wrong, it's evil, but it's also kind of sad, right? So what question 3? What about aggression? Is aggression bad, or is it just violence that's bad? And I guess it's important to make the distinction. Aggression itself isn't bad in the same way that violence is, in that you can be aggressive in something like a sport, right? You can really go for the ball to score, and there's an aggressive there, basically meaning a proactive action. And that proactive action isn't necessarily bad, but if we've decided on a way of life that is going to be ruled by immorality and foolishness rather than wisdom and morality, if we choose that way of life, then aggression has a way of merely being foreplay for violence. It just becomes the dating version of the marriage of violence, and that's something to be really aware of. We can use our assertive nature. If you have an assertive nature, you can use that to good effect. You can use that natural tendency a lot of men have of being aggressive, in that they're proactive. That's a good thing. But we don't want to form a habit of actual aggression, because aggression tends to be, I'm going to take from you. I'm going to take something from you, and that just leads to violence. So we got to be really careful about that kind of thing. A person who's willing to be abusive with their mouth, it's not a lot of steps away from being abusive with your fists. And so you got to decide, is it really the way I want to live? Now, the Bible talks about us being meek. One of the things Jesus said in his most famous sermon was, "Blessed are the meek; they'll inherit the earth." Right? The meek, the humble, the gentle. And so question 4 would be, but if you're weak, meek, aren't you weak? A lot of people think this, right? That meekness means weakness, and it really doesn't. It's actually the opposite. Meekness is or gentleness, another word for gentleness, is the ability to control your strength. A person who is gentle isn't weak. They're actually quite controlled, which is a strength. It's not weak at all. There's times in life when your strength is needed. God gives us strength. He gives us strength to change the world, to build things, to overcome obstacles, to defend ourselves. And all those things are okay. And strength is a requirement that God gives us. And if you're a person with great strength, then that's wonderful. God's given you a blessing. And use that strength well. Gentleness is a way of talking about controlling your strength so that you use your strength constructively rather than destructively. Right? You can hold a flower in your hand with all the strength you have. You can hold it in your hand gently, or you can squeeze it in your hand and never enjoy the flower because you've crushed it with your strength. Well, that's not gentle. And that's the idea. When we have strength that we use, and we use our strength in an aggressive way in order to gain, that's when we go down the road of violence. And instead, if we use our strength in a way to give protection, to give help, to collaborate with others, to produce and contribute to community, and you use your strength in these ways of giving, it's a wonderful thing to have great strength. But as this verse said, those that gain by violence, if you choose a way that gains by violence, then you use your strength not in a meek way, but in actually a very weak way, which is to just take from others, and that will rob you of your life. It eventually comes around. It really does. Those who live by the sword do die by the sword. So if you've embraced any kind of a violence in your life, I really encourage you to get away from it as fast as you can. It's deadly, not just for those around you, but for you yourself. Find a way to harness your strength that's positive and makes better the lives of everyone around you instead of harming. So that's the devotional for today. I'm just going to take a quick look at my calendar, but I think tomorrow I should be on at 1 o'clock. Yes, I should be, I think. Hopefully, Lord willing, I will be on again tomorrow at 1 o'clock with the next verse. For now, let's just pray God's blessing. God bless each one, I pray. And Lord, help us not to be people of violence, but rather people of good, gentle, but strong hearts, strong bodies and minds. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow.